We came here to feel. We came here to do the heart work, the work of opening the heart and keeping the heart open no matter what. Keeping it open no matter what. And this is what it looks like to be a living embodiment of love with a capital L, not a conditional or transactional love.
This is the Miracle Zone.
I ask, I see, I know, I trust, I be.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Miracle Zone podcast, where business leadership and frequency align. And today we're going to use these beautiful solstice energies to have a powerful conversation. So it's a really powerful day for manifestation and all the magic. And my invitation to you is to join me so that we can not just focus on our personal magic that we want to weave in our own lives and in our own businesses and in our own bank accounts, but also focus on what vision we are weaving for the collective. So let's use this big solstice energy to have a bigger conversation, to have some bigger explorations around what we are co-creating for the collective, for the world. So I invite you to grab a tea and jump in. And we're going to talk about something that's been coming up so much in my circles over the past week, because there has been a lot going on in the world. Some might call this prophetic time. Some might call this transitional time. Some might call this scary time. Some might call this fill in the blank times. But there is a lot going on in the world. And it's intense, regardless of what we call it, even if we call it evolutionary times, right? It's times of big change. It's times of a lot of questioning around what's going to happen, who's going to do what. Different parts of the world have been on fire, right? And if you follow astrology and a lot of what the astrologers have shared, it's very much in line with what has been happening in the cosmos as well. So it's like a little fire, not a little fire, it's like a huge fire that we have been navigating through. And it's brought up some really powerful themes related to power, related to our role as leaders in this particular space and time that we are living through in this moment. And this conversation that's been coming up with friends, with clients, all over the place, also internally within myself, is this conversation of what is my role here as somebody who is very tuned in spiritually and connected to the multidimensional reality, and also somebody who notices suffering, who sees suffering, and who doesn't necessarily feel comfortable or like it's necessarily my path to look away from that suffering and pretend it doesn't exist, because there is so much spiritual bypassing that can happen in the spirituality space and the new age space. And those of us who don't quite feel comfortable with that find ourselves a little bit lost in the middle. And so I really want to have that conversation because I've been having some amazing conversations again in my world over the past week on this topic. And it's not the first time that I have these conversations. When I started this business 10 years ago, it was actually front and center what we focused on, because a lot of the coaching and mentorship that I did was specifically for leadership, for change makers. And so many of my clients were in the social justice space. Some of them were in the nonprofit space, which is where my former career was. And some of them were more getting into the personal development space and the business development and the wellness space as well. But there was a broad range of them. And now a lot of the people that I work with are operating somewhere in the middle where all of these things are true. And what we found in speaking with each other and connecting with each other is that It's a space that doesn't get a lot of voice in the mainstream of even the alternative dialogues that we have. And it can feel really uncomfortable when you feel like, okay, I'm not fitting perfectly into this box of activist or change maker by the normal definition of it, but also not fitting into this box of just a spiritual being living a spiritual existence in a human body, but disconnected from what's actually happening in the 3D. And so there's this really important space to explore how we can bridge those two within ourselves and how we reconcile that also within our businesses. So, in the Miracle Business Framework, which you can actually download, one of the elements that I discuss in there, so I discuss 7 different elements of the Miracle Business Framework. One of the elements is culture and ethos and values in your business. And so it's really relevant, right? Because these are the things that, as leaders who speak to communities and influence opinion and are putting out content in these times, are really big things to explore. And it's things that aren't really discussed very much when you're doing the build a business or make 7 figures or 8 figures or whatever. These deeper conversations of how do I reconcile these values that I have and these understandings of what my role is with this vehicle of change that I have right now, which is a business. If I am leading a business, which most of you, if you're watching, are doing that. And how do I reconcile those two so that there is coherence there? And so that what I am sharing and the frequency that I'm putting out is resonant with myself and with my people, and that I'm having the right conversations with the right people and not getting pulled into conversations that maybe aren't mine to have, but also not looking away from conversations that maybe are mine to have. And so that's what I want to explore a little bit today, is how I bridge these two worlds myself and how I see this work for my clients. I'm going to share also some practical recommendations for how to do this, as well as just some bigger picture perspectives around this as well. So I want to share that up front so that you can really situate yourself and be like, is this a conversation that I want to be part of and continue listening to? Or maybe you're very much decided that you're on one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum, and this schism that exists between these change-making activists and these spiritual activists, if you will. They're still activists, but are doing it from a very different perspective that doesn't necessarily see the need to engage with that. If you're curious about this conversation in the middle ground and how we can be with both, because for those of us who do feel that it is something that really affects us and that we really spend a lot of time thinking about, then I'm excited to dive into this with you. And so before I jump into that, I wanted to share a little bit about me and my background in case you are new to this space, or maybe you're not new, but I don't talk about it all the time. And I do share a lot about it in the first episode of the Miracles on podcast, so you can go back and check that out. But just in a nutshell, so when it comes to topics such as war and atrocities and things like that, I feel very comfortable exploring these topics. And here's why. So I myself am a child of war. So I'm from originally Mozambique, which is at the time when I was born, was a war-torn country. And so there were times when there was so much bombing and violence and warfare happening outside of the city where I was living or my family was living, that we didn't leave in the capital in Maputo. And so we could hear bombs in the distance, and there was rationing happening. And so my parents and everybody else had to wait in line to get their food rations. Kind of the origin of the world that I grew up into. And then eventually my parents moved to the United States. And I experienced this big contrast of coming from this war-torn society and country and background into the US, which was 100 light years of a difference. I don't even know what 100 light years are. But to me, that seems like a very stark difference. And so I remember walking into the grocery store and there being like 20 different types of milk. Can you imagine going from a place where somebody has to wait in line for a ration of milk to another place where there's 20 types of milk super conveniently available and there's a bunch of shops with them around. So as I was growing up, I would be between this world and Mozambique. We would go back every once in a while. And so I experienced the stark contrast. So I didn't have the luxury of looking away and not seeing. I didn't grow up in a super privileged bubble. There was still privilege, obviously, because I am a white person and I was in Africa at the time. And I continue to be a white person and still be very privileged. So I'm not saying that there was no privilege, but I'm saying I didn't have the privilege of not even knowing what war is, what poverty is, what suffering is. And in fact, I got slammed with both the contrast of the two, and that really affected me. So from the beginning, I've been an activist. Even my parents were very much activists as well and revolutionaries. And so it was in my blood, anyways. But from my own life, in this particular life, I was born into that. And my teenage years, I was very much an activist. I was very involved in a lot of protests, not just in my teen years, but since then involved in protests, involved in different causes. I spent my summer working on human rights things, volunteering for human rights organizations, even leading activist movements, all of that. So I feel very comfortable in that space having these conversations, which might not be true for everyone, but this is why it's important to me. And it's why it's important to me also when I work with people that it's something that there is resonance there as well, that it's something that they care about too. I'm very comfortable in that space, and I worked in the nonprofit world afterwards. I also worked with foundations, helping to direct huge sums of funds for development projects and women and children projects and all of that goodness. So that was my first career before I experienced burnout and found myself in a place where that did not work out for me. And I went back to, okay, what does leadership look like and how can I support other leaders to continue to be change makers in the world without themselves burning out? And then that eventually led to me starting my coaching and mentorship business, supporting other women leaders and women identifying leaders in doing the work of change making in the world. And some of them are very much boots on the ground kind of change makers. And some of them are very much in disguise change makers. And there's nothing is better or worse than the other. There's a time and a place and a role for everyone. But there's still this concern with the state of affairs and the role that we came here to play in these times. And this feeling of responsibility as leaders in these times. So beginning with a broader perspective, one thing I know for sure is that you did not come here to escape feeling or to escape what it feels like to be humaning, right? Because otherwise, if you don't really need to feel, or if you don't need to have the human experience, then why are you even incarnated? We can just be there at one with source, right? So part of being here in this human experience is the feeling, it is the humaning. And so looking away from that because of how it makes us feel doesn't quite make sense, because we came here to feel. We came here to do the heart work, the work of opening the heart and keeping the heart open no matter what. No matter what. Not conditionally, but something beyond transactionally of, oh, I can keep my heart open, keeping it open no matter what. And this is what it looks like to be a living embodiment of love with a capital L, not a conditional or transactional love. I can be loving if I am in a perfectly peaceful environment, undisturbed. But to be a living embodiment of love with a capital L, which is no matter what is happening around me, no matter what atrocities I am noticing in the world, no matter what, I can keep my heart open. And not only that, as somebody who identifies as a leader who's here in these very specific times, who chose to be here in these specific times, who trained to be here in these very specific times, I can lead with an open heart no matter what. And that is part of my work and my mission and my movement and my message here in this world. And in doing this, we're remembering love is where we came from, and love is where we're going to return to. And so, in doing so, in the in between periods of where we came from and where we're going to, in embodying that, then we are embodying our truth and we are showing up in coherence with our truth and who we are at the soul level, at the core level, is showing up as this love. This love doesn't need to look away. This love can feel, it can still exist. It can still lead in this way. And I have met some people in this world who have gone through so much suffering that you cannot fathom. And nevertheless, their hearts are open and they're the most loving people. And those are the most spiritual people. Not spiritual as in dressing all spiritual and having a huge following on Instagram, right? But in terms of actually being a living embodiment of love on this earth. And so, how can we aspire to be that in how we lead? And how does that then translate into our business and what we're doing and what we're talking about and how we're showing up? Right. And that's where we can get a bit more into the details of the how. But I think it's really important to just have this broader perspective of, oh, wait, yeah, I'm here to feel. Right. Because the more range that I can feel, the more range that I could feel, right? To be able to be with that deepest rage allows me to be with the deepest rapture. To be able to be with that deepest grief allows me to be with that deepest gratitude. And so this is part of just recognizing that it's the work that we're here to do, right? And as empaths, figuring out how we can function in this world with this system, which can be highly sensitive to energies and to emotions and to picking things up from other people, picking things up from the collective. How do we function in our particular vehicle? What is important for us to remain functional, still feeling, but not being flooded with something that will incapacitate us and it's of no service to our communities and to ourselves, right? And so I wanted to begin with that again, because I feel like that broader perspective is really important for setting the context of, okay, I understand that I need to feel, because a lot of the challenges that come up when we're thinking about spiritual bypassing is this avoidance of feeling. Like it's going to be a negative, low vibe or bring my frequency down to feel the things. It's no, the frequency isn't like up, down like this. We have our core frequency that we cultivate. And yes, over time, we're working on that and we're working on that, but we're anchoring it in, we're embodying it, we're cultivating it. And that's the core frequency. The feelings can go up and down, right? They're like the top of the ocean waves. We can go up, we can go down, we can be sad, we can be happy. I'm like giggling part of my day and I'm crying part of my day. That happens often, sometimes within an hour of each other. The waves come and go. It's also part of our feminine nature, right? We're not suppressing, we're letting ourselves ride these waves, and they look different for each person. For some people, it's like tsunami waves. For others, it's smaller waves, but there's still the surface level waves, the feeling they're happening. But then there's a depth of the ocean, which is more still and which is our frequency, right? And so I talk a lot about operating at the miracle frequency. It's that. Oh, I can anchor into this no matter what is happening on the surface level of the feelings. I'm anchored into the miracle frequency, and I do the work to do that more and more, and it comes more and more naturally. And then I don't even think about it. That's just the baseline of how I operate, right? But the feelings can still happen, and they're not going to turn everything upside down, or not everything will go awry because I'm letting myself feel these feelings. Okay. I want to get into, okay, but how? What does that actually look like? So, the first area that I want to talk about is recognizing that you have a choice most of the time. There's people who don't have a choice, they are in it. It's affecting them immediately, directly. It's affecting their families, it's affecting their countries. That's true for some of my clients. So, if that's you, then the choice is less difficult to have because it's in your face. But most of the people have a choice that are listening to this podcast right now. Most people have a choice of the degree to which they want to engage. And that's why some people choose to just look away and exercise their privilege of looking away, whereas other people choose to look at. And either way, it's a choice. And I say that because many people in the world don't realize that it's a choice, right? They're constantly checking the news, they're constantly engaged and looking without realizing that they can choose to switch it off or to choose how much they can engage with it, right? Or what sources they're engaging with in the first place. And so this first area is really about bringing consciousness to this choice that you have of how you want to engage, and bringing some discernment to that, bringing some boundaries to that, bringing some intentionality to that, and not just letting yourself getting pulled by the current, whichever one it is. Even for the ones who are really engaged on the ground, and I've had clients who are very much at the forefront of big movements and influencing big thought leadership around certain movements, there still can be a point where they feel like they've been pulled too far and they've lost themselves and their leadership in that, and they need to come back and re-engage with, okay, what's my role and how am I engaging? What are the conversations that I'm having? What is the intention for what I am communicating? So it's easy to get pulled. And so that first piece is really this discernment, intentionality, consciousness, bringing conscious awareness to it. So what can this look like? It can look like, as I mentioned before, deciding what you're consuming and how much of it you're consuming and what is right for you. It can be different for every person. Some people can just check what's going on in the world and watch the news and be less affected by it. Some are more empathic and it will drive them into the ground and they won't be able to function, right? And so a lot of it is about knowing your nervous system and your nervous system capacity and being really in tune with your body and what your body can handle. Again, this is a privilege because people who are in it don't have that choice. They are in it. They can't just pull themselves out of this. And I have been in situations where I have been very close to the forefront, very much in it. In terms of humanitarian work, it's really difficult to pull yourself out. There's still, if you're lucky, some sort of boundaries or safe haven or something that you can turn to if you are in a leadership and change making role. But it's a lot more narrow what the options are. But as somebody who isn't directly affected, there is that, okay, knowing myself and my nervous system and what's happening right now and how I can engage. And also knowing intentionally, again, knowing that it might feel uncomfortable to engage, but it's important to me to feel something. I don't want to pretend that suffering doesn't exist, and I don't want to be overwhelmed by it, but I have a desire to be part of that conversation, because in seeing the darkness, I am better able to see where my light is best placed and who I am bringing along in my community of care that I'm stewarding through these transitional times. So it's getting really clear on what that looks like for you. What is the right amount of engagement or disengagement? What are the sources? And how do I want to? Can something just be coming up into my awareness, or is it only if I'm choosing to actually go and look things up? Who are people that I'm in conversation with where I can have these conversations in a way that feels that I'm still in my power instead of completely losing myself? What support do I need from mentors or from others who are in a similar place as me to have these conversations so that I'm not just receiving inputs without feeling like I have nowhere to process that or have those conversations? And that's a lot of the conversations that I have with my clients as well, is whenever something big happens in the world that directly affects them, or we get in this conversation of, okay, how are we interacting with this? What is the messaging that we're putting out? Things like that. It's a place for them to come and digest that, and for us together to help find a way forward. Again, awareness of the body and the nervous system and your capacity. And this is obviously the result of the deep inner work, which you've done. If you're here, you've done that. You've been doing that, and you continue to do that, as well as the consciousness of the choice. And it can change at different points in your life, and figuring out what is it right now, just coming into the present moment, what feels true right now in terms of how I want to engage with this. And then noticing when what you thought was right wasn't. For me, last week on Friday, I got a little too over engaged and became a little non functional for a while, and had to really bring myself back, because I could feel in my body the anxiety building up that was keeping me from being able to actually engage constructively with it. And if I'm in that state, then it's hard for me to support my clients who are coming to me to have these conversations, to make big decisions for their businesses, and for their communities, and for events that they want to do, and the leadership role that they want to take. So that's the first step, is really just bringing conscious awareness to that, because we know that we are here to create a beautiful, amazing lives for ourselves, and to experience that in this human form, to experience those types of feelings. And we also know, if you're following me and you're in this space and we're having this conversation right here in this podcast, is that you're also here to be a leader in stewarding the dawn of a new way, right? There's crumbling happening, and we know it's creating way for the new, and we have a role to play in that. And how can we be with both? How can I do that without over sacrificing myself? But how can I do that without forgetting this role that I came here to play, and that I'm feeling really called to step into leadership in? Secondly, it's really important to create pockets for feeling, because a lot of times as leaders, we are the rocks, right? We are the ones keeping it together. We are the calm in chaos, and we're good at that. It's one of the reasons that we are leaders, right? And that means that in those instances, we're having to set aside what might come up as feelings, be it extreme sadness or grief, be it extreme rage. We need to play with those a little bit so that we can show up in a way that we want to, again, intentionally, to lead our communities, or steward our movements, or make decisions for our business, right? But we still need to come back to them and process them, and still have space to feel them, so that they're not just sitting there unprocessed, unacknowledged, because that can really have a big impact on you, both mentally, spiritually, energetically, physically, in all of the ways. And I've experienced this myself when I was working in the nonprofit world. It was before I was doing any of this personal development work, any of this emotional intelligence work, any of this work of being with my feelings. And so I was surrounded by things that were very challenging to process, especially when I was working around pediatric HIV. It was babies dying everywhere, statistics of babies dying, visiting facilities, being with mothers with babies dying. It was a lot emotionally, but I didn't have any space to do the feeling work of that. And it took a huge toll on me because I didn't have the awareness that I needed to create spaces to actually be with that, to get support, to be able to talk through that, to be able to process that, so that I wasn't just an unfeeling person doing this work, which was important and beautiful, but also there's all of this stuff that was accumulating, right? And so it's something that, again, it can look really different for each person. But for me, again, I'm so good at keeping it together and staying calm and all of those things. I will intentionally create pockets of time where I'm like, okay, let's feel. And I'm laughing because I need to do this way more often than I already do, but times to actually let the tears flow, let the rage roar, right? Creating pockets of these in, it might be daily for you, it might be once a week, it might be once a month, depending on what's going on. It can look really different for you, but how are you creating these pockets for feeling, for letting all of that move that you haven't let move in the moment because you were leading? So that's the second piece that I think is super important, because it needs to move. Because if we are engaging in it and we're looking and we're seeing, right, families being torn apart, for example, in really heartbreaking ways, and we have our hearts open and we're open to feel, then we need to be open to feel. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's going to be overwhelming. It's going to be counterproductive. And that's a reason why it's so much easier to just choose to look away, because we don't know how to be with it. And again, that might be private spaces, it might be group spaces. There's groups that come together to process grief. That's something that in many cultures, there were grieving circles where people would actually come to grieve together, and there would be grief rituals for the whole community. And those don't exist now, but it was exactly this, creating spaces for these things to move, these feelings to move and to be felt, so that we can still continue to function while still acknowledging that they exist. The third thing that I want to mention is knowing your role and really reflecting on what your role is. Again, this will depend on the issue or the topic or the cause at hand, or just in general for how you lead in the world in general. Because our role, some of us have a very similar role throughout our lives. For some of us, it also changes and evolves over time. So it's something like, for example, it evolves over time. So one resource that I really love to use here is Deepa Iyer's Social Change Ecosystem Map. And it's this amazing map, and I'll link to her Instagram account below. It's an amazing map that maps out different roles that different people can play in bringing about social change, right? Because ideally, yes, we have as many people out there protesting, for example, but maybe that's not your role in this particular moment in time. For example, sometimes that's more appropriate for able-bodied individuals, right? Or for example, when I had my son, that's when I stopped doing that, because I was a new mother with a small child. And I remember I was so frustrated that I couldn't actually go out and do the protesting and the activism that I used to do before, because I was with a little baby. And so in that moment, my role was different. So over the course of your life, your role may change. And it's always good to go back to and reflect on, what is my role in this moment? Right? Also, as you rise in different levels of leadership, I started getting more into an organizing role, into more of an advisory role. And so now a lot of what I do is advise those who are leading the movements on the ground, on the strategy, on the messaging, on how what path they want to take, whether it's a social change movement or whether it's something in their business that's totally different, but obviously related. It's more of an advisory capacity. And it's my role to have spaciousness and capacity in my body, in my nervous system, to be able to receive those who are coming to me for guidance on these issues, who are in the thick of it and don't have that capacity necessarily because they need a safe, calm space to be able to pull back and actually look at, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay, what is the next step? And have those conversations. And so our roles evolve over time. So on the map, if you look at it, and you definitely should, you'll see there's different roles, right? There's disruptors, there's caregivers, there's healers, there's many other. So oftentimes we see change making or social activism as looking as one thing, looking like one thing, and we're either that or not that, as opposed to asking, oh, what is my role in this change making process that feels aligned? And what does that mean for my business? Does it mean anything for my business? Is there overlap there? And so for me, it's important for me to talk about these things every once in a while and share where I stand and what my thoughts are and what my values are, because it's important for me to be clear about who I resonate with and who I love to support and the work that they're doing in the world. And if it's just about the spirituality where you're blissed out all the time, there's nothing wrong with that. You do you. But I'm here to work with the leaders who are stewarding in a new world, right? And so we can't look away from what's happening in the 3D completely, because that informs the work that we're doing in the other dimensions. We need to be with the both. We need to see what the evolution is. We need to look at the interconnection points. We need to look at, okay, how are we shaping this? We need to have those conversations. So that's the third area. The fourth area I really want to touch on today is around joy. So it's really challenging to figure out what to do with our joy when we are surrounded by suffering and sorrow and heartbreak everywhere we turn, and in the news, and also in our lives sometimes, right? And it can be easy to discount it or feel guilty for feeling that. And I think it's really important to remember that joy and pain and joy and suffering can coexist, and that is perfectly normal and is perfectly healthy. And that in this context of a world where we are trying to be pushed more and more into a space of fear instead of a space of love and joy and elation, that these acts of joy are revolutionary in and of themselves. Just like beauty, we can still allow beauty in. Even just getting ready for this, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be talking about these topics, and I still want to put on the little necklace. I still want some roses here, because beauty is the sustenance that allows us to take a little bit of that edge off from all of the harshness of the world. And so to not make it wrong or to not feel guilty about it, but to let it coexist with everything else, again, because we are experiencing the full range of human emotion and human feeling. And so as part of this, I wanted to share one of the books that I really love, which is See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love by Valerie Kaur. And she has another amazing book too that's more recent. But she has a section in here where she talks about joy specifically that I want to read to you, and just encourage you to check out this book and just follow her and her work, because she is, when the poop hits the fan on the global stage, I always turn to her to help me navigate this spiritual warrior or sage warrior, as she talks about in her latest book. So she says, joy is possible even amid great labors, the labor of dying, the labor of birthing, and the labors between. We cannot force it, but when we create moments to breathe between labor pains and surrender our senses to the present moment, notice the colors and light and feeling of being alive here together, joy comes more easily. It is a felt sense in our bodies, in the face of horrors visited upon our world daily. in the struggle to protect our loved ones, choosing to let joy in is a revolutionary act. Joy returns us to everything good and beautiful and worth fighting for. It gives us energy for the long labor. Letting in joy, therefore, is the 10th practice of revolutionary love, the core practice that sustains all others. Joy is the gift of love. It makes the labor an end in itself. I believe laboring in joy is the meaning of life. May we look up at the night sky, may we let joy in, for we will be someone's ancestors one day. And if we do this right, they will inherit not our fear, but bravery born of joy. So that's on page 307, if you want to look that up. It really is a beautiful book and resource that I recommend. And the 5th area that I want to mention is noticing that this schism between spirituality and change making is a false schism in the first place, right? Because when we are doing the sacred work, it gives us strength to show up for the change making work. And when we are doing the change making work, it's giving us the juice, right? That then allows us to deepen in our spiritual work, because it is challenging to show up with an open heart and keep our heart open in this world, right? And that's going to allow us to deepen spiritually, right? Because we're not just ascending up into the ethers of bliss, but we're also ascending, and more so ascending into the heart, into the depths of the heart. Depths of the heart. And so I want to mention that because I think it's a false dichotomy. I think it's something that is unfortunate that happens, that we feel like we need to pick one camp or pick the other camp, or if we're somewhere in the middle, we don't really fit in, or we feel weird talking about spirituality in the context of change making, or talking about change making and activism in the context of spirituality. Is they complement each other, right? We came here both for our internal elevation and for the elevation of the collective. And sometimes internally that looks like bliss, and sometimes it looks like a crumbling, right? And that's true for the external world too. Sometimes externally it looks like, wow, miracles. And sometimes it looks like the crumbling. And they're mirrors of each other too. We get to experience them internally as a microcosm of the external. And so I wanted to share this because one of my most vivid past life memories that I have is I remember being one of the ones who would do some sort of blessing or consecration for soldiers before they would go out to war. And so I can see them lining up there and then coming up to me and me doing some kind of holy ritual to bless them before they went off to war. And so again, I think we forget that we are spiritual warriors. We are sacred warriors. And so in many ways, we do this ourselves too. We can bless ourselves. We do our rituals. We do our ceremonies. And in these times, it becomes even more important to lean in on those blessings that we tap into on the daily to bring holiness to this whole experience, to bring protection to this whole experience, and to fuel us as we then go off to be a stand for whatever it is that we are a stand for in this world, whatever we are putting our arms up for, whatever we are fighting for from a place of love in this world. And it doesn't make sense to think about one as being completely separate from the other, right? Because we lean on these beautiful rituals and ceremonies and practices that we have to give us the strength, the fortitude, the clarity, the nurturance to actually show up and do the work. So I've just given you a lot of food for thought. Thank you for joining me on this solstice reflection, really using the powerful amplified energies to look and to have these bigger conversations, to have these bigger reflections of what our role is. And I wanted to complete today just by tuning in and feeling into if there's any message or transmission from the Great Mother related to this topic or just to these times in general, just to complete this in a more grounded in the heart space. I feel like I've been sharing lots of ideas and what works and practicalities. But then there's just the quality of working with the mother, the Great Mother, and the respect for all of life and all of beings, where, of course, there is no separation there. Of course, we are connected. Of course, we look. Of course, we nurture. Of course, we protect, because that's the nature of us as an extension of the mother herself. As I tune in, what I'm hearing is our hearts are strong. Our hearts are strong. Just a reminder that we can be with it. We can be with the suffering. We can be with the pain. We can be with the fear. Even if we know that much of it is an illusion, we can be with it. We can still look at it because we're here to take people with us on this bridge from point A to point B, moving from this 3D space into a more 5D reality, which is connected to the heart space and beyond into other dimensional realities. But we can't get to point B without looking at and residing in point A, right? The whole point is we can be with it all. And we do that work of becoming more and more practiced in being with it all. We have our whole lifetime to practice this, right? And as we rise into our leadership, as we rise into our eldership, we get to be able to do this better and better and better. But we can only do that when we continue to practice in this lifetime as we have in previous lifetimes. It doesn't stop. We don't get to just turn and say, whoop, that's not relevant anymore because I'm now operating at this level. Again, knowing your role in this space and also knowing that your role here is to help to shepherd people from here to there, right? That is the shift that we're here to make. And so we cannot take people from point A to point B by denying that point A is real and saying that it's just an illusion and that we don't need to look at it and it's not relevant to us. Some people can do that, but not you in the role of leadership that you came here to take in these times, in the legacy that you came here to leave. And so it's figuring out what is your dance? What is your dance in this space? And knowing that you do have the capacity in your heart to hold it all. And to know that you also are not holding it all by yourself. There are others. There are councils and councils of others. There have been councils and councils of others. And as things continue to progress, and they will in the coming years, more and more, we will be reconvening in these councils together, having these conversations together. But unless we're able to do the both, we're not going to be able to find each other. Because in doing the both, we will find who we resonate with, who we respect their opinions with, who we want to sit around the table and around the fire with to have these conversations of how are we stewarding in this new age, this new era, this new earth, given what's happening in the 3D realms, given what's happening with AI, given what's happening in other things that we can't even imagine yet, but that are just around the corner. We're going to need to be able to come around the table and have these conversations, but we can't have these conversations without the context of what actually is happening on the ground, even if it is in many ways a grand illusion. So that's the message that I was getting. Us un as unya shama anya sur ai husiat anya un ayasuma anya aishkupuna hais un aya. It's just to continue to work with the heart space. That is the number one thing. And it's the thing that's going to contribute both to the change making work and the capacity to do that work, as well as to the spiritual work of evolution and ascension that you're doing. It's all rooted in the heart. And when we do that work, we can be with the both and not feel like we need to choose between one or the other, or that one or the other does not belong to us. And yeah, thank you for joining me today for this special solstice edition on the Miracle Zone podcast. And I look forward to seeing you next time.
I trust I be.
Thank you for tuning in to the Miracle Zone. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a transmission. And if today's episode and conversation resonated, leave a review and share it with a fellow visionary leader. In the links, you can access my free Miracle Business Blueprint, the 7-part framework I use with my clients to create a thriving, scalable, and self-sustaining business that gives you more freedom, not less. Plus, you'll receive a guided process to identify where to focus first so you can spend more time leading in your miracle zone right away. Let's build the new as a collective for the collective. Together, we're not just creating miracles, we're living them. Until next time, stay in the miracle zone.